Water closed over the little steamer so fast that the lights on her upper deck were still burning as they slid beneath the black surface of Puget Sound. One moment, the SS Dix was pushing through the evening chop, crowded with passengers heading home to Seattle. The next, her bow was crushed in toward the saloon, her hull rolled hard to port, and people were thrown off their feet as if the deck had turned to ice. Above the crash of metal and the deep groan of bending wood came a single realization. The ship was going down, and it was going down now. It was November 18th, 1906, just after 6:30 at night. The air on Elliott Bay was cold enough that every breath hung white in front of the face. Out on the water, the Dix was making her regular run from Port Blakely toward Seattle, a short trip she had made many times before. She was small by passenger steamer standards, barely 130 feet long, built for short hauls across the Sound with a full load of commuters and mill workers. That night, she carried around 70 people, many finishing a weekend on Bainbridge Island or returning from work in the lumber town. Down in the engine room, the machinery beat a steady rhythm as the little ship worked her way across the bay. On deck, men smoked and watched the shoreline lights drift by, while families with children stayed close to the warmer saloon spaces. The sea was calm enough that no one worried about the crossing. People talked over one another, passed newspapers around, and settled into the comfort of a trip they knew by heart. Farther out on the bay, the much larger freighter Jeannie moved north under the weight of heavy cargo. She was deeper in the water, slower to turn, and commanded a different kind of respect from anyone who worked the Sound. Crossing patterns between freighters and small passenger steamers were common, but every captain knew that misjudging speed, distance, or right-of-way could turn a routine pass into a disaster. As the two vessels closed the distance between them, witnesses would later recall the Dix altering her course slightly, angling across the freighter's path. On the bridge of the Jeannie, crewmen saw the smaller steamer and waited for her to correct back. For a few long seconds, each ship held its line, the crews assuming the other would adjust. Then someone realized the angle was wrong. Shouts carried through the wind. Orders were called. The Jeannie's engines went astern, but her momentum was too much, and the water between the two ships disappeared. The freighter's bow struck the Dix on the port side, just forward of the midship saloon. The impact punched through the wooden hull as if it were a thin wall, opening a jagged wound below the waterline. Inside the saloon, passengers were thrown against benches and bulkheads. Lanterns swung wildly, casting brief shadows across faces suddenly stiff with fear. Some people were knocked off their feet. Others, stunned, scrambled to understand what had just happened. There was no gradual flooding, no long struggle to stay afloat. Water poured into the damaged hull so quickly that the ship rolled almost immediately. Passengers felt the deck sag beneath them, heard the roar of water flooding in, and then felt gravity tilt sideways as tables, chairs, and human bodies slid toward the low side. Outside, in the cold dark, a few people managed to rush to the rail and throw themselves clear. Most never had the chance. The Dix heeled over, the last of her lights still shining through the cabin windows, and then she went under in less than 5 minutes. From the Jeannie's decks, crewmen watched as the little steamer disappeared. The freighter had taken damage to her bow, but remained afloat. Her sailors began rescue efforts, throwing lines and lifebuoys overboard, and scrambling to lower boats. In the water below, voices rose in panic and faded quickly as the cold of the Sound wrapped itself around the struggling survivors. The temperature of the water that night made survival a matter of minutes. Those who had fallen in fully clothed found their limbs stiffening almost immediately. Some clung to bits of wreckage, others to each other, trying to keep their faces above the surface in the faint light from the Jeannie and the distant shore. A handful were hauled aboard the freighter, shivering and stunned, unable at first to describe what had just happened. Back in Seattle, word of a collision in the bay spread faster than the official reports could keep up. Families who knew loved ones were riding the Dix that evening rushed to the waterfront. They scanned the dark water and the approaching boats, desperate for familiar faces. At the same time, police and harbor officials began organizing a response, sending out tugs and smaller craft to search for survivors and bodies. As the night went on, the scale of the disaster became grimly clear. The Dix had carried dozens of passengers, but only a fraction were recovered alive. Some had managed to swim to the Genie, others were pulled from the water by responding boats. Many never resurfaced. Their bodies would be found in the days that followed, washed up along shorelines or brought up by grappling hooks and divers as crews tried to locate the wreck. The little steamer had gone down so fast that there had been no time to launch lifeboats, no chance to organize an orderly evacuation. Most of the dead were trapped inside the hull as it filled. Witnesses later spoke of seeing the ship's lights glowing beneath the surface for a brief moment before they winked out, leaving only black water where a busy passenger vessel had been minutes earlier. In the days after the sinking, attention turned to the question of blame. Official inquiries examined navigation rules, whistle signals, and the actions of both captains leading up to the collision. Investigators focused heavily on the Dix's master, Captain Philip H. Mason, who had survived. Testimony suggested he may have cut across the Genie's path instead of maintaining a safer course. Other witnesses pointed to the freighter's speed and position. The hearings became a painful public airing of what-ifs. Families of the dead sat through discussions of angles and sound signals, listening as lawyers and experts argued over responsibility. When Captain Mason was eventually found negligent, it satisfied some, but did nothing to change the outcome. The Dix still lay on the bottom of the Sound, and dozens of lives were still gone. For the Puget Sound community, the loss hit especially hard because the Dix had been such a familiar sight. She had carried workers, families, and tourists along short routes that felt safe and routine. Many people had ridden her without a second thought, trusting the daily rhythm of departure and arrival. The idea that a ship like that could be crushed and sunk in minutes on a route so close to home shook that sense of safety. Salvage crews considered raising the wreck, but the cost and difficulty of the operation, combined with the damage she had sustained, made it unlikely. Instead, the Dix remained where she had fallen, resting on the floor of Puget Sound as the years went on. For the families, though, there was no fading. Anniversaries came and went. Children grew up without parents. Husbands and wives who had once shared that short, familiar commute now stared at an empty space at the table. The sinking of the SS Dix stands as one of the worst maritime disasters in Washington's inland waters, not because of a storm or hidden reef, but because of a moment's misjudgment on a calm November evening. A routine crossing, a crowded passenger deck, a freighter on a steady course, and then an impact that tore a small hole in a wooden hull and opened a much larger one in the lives of everyone left behind. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.